everyone, my name is Lisette Coley and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. And I'm excited to be with you today because we're launching a new series within PF's YouTube channel. We're going to try and bring noted authors and their very interesting works in depth to you so that you can expand your horizons and we can really get a sense of what the author is trying to present. So I'm going to be with you today with Dr. Stephanie Stevens, PF's 2018 Francis P. Bolton Fellowship Award winner. Stephanie received her PhD from the University of Canterbury in UK in 2012. And between 2004 and 2013, she served on the executive committee of the International Association of Jungian Studies. Her dissertation, C.G. Jung and the Dead, The Red Book and Memories, Dreams, Reflections, 1896 to 1916, was proudly added to the shelves of the Garrett Library. Her dissertation was expanded and now has been published and is available by Routledge and is entitled C.G. Jung and the Dead, Visions, Active Imagination, and the Unconscious Terrain. Stephanie presently teaches psychology and is a practicing counselor in Canberra, Australia. I know PF's founder, my grandmother, Eileen J. Garrett, visited Dr. Jung a couple of times at his residence in Ascona, and he, in fact, talked her out of leaving her mediumship behind when she thought she wanted to do so. So on a personal note, I've always been very interested in his work and how it connects with psychical research. So at this point, I'm very excited to launch a bunch of questions to Stephanie, and I'm sure she'll be able to bounce back the answers, and we'll all benefit from them. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie now. So now, Stephanie, can you tell me a little bit about the book truly is about?
Yes, I'd love to. The book is based on my dissertation and the research that I did over a number of years. After I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I was very moved by Jung's account of his confrontation with the unconscious, which is one of the chapters in Memories, Dreams. And he speaks very movingly about certain experiences he had with the dead. And I was very intrigued with the way he was talking about these experiences of the dead. And at the time I was teaching Latin and had been teaching Latin for many years. And I'd been teaching one particular classics story called the Aeneid by Virgil. And in this particular story, it's the story of Aeneas, who is a hero, and he goes through many adventures, but he has a fate, and his fate is to go and found a great city that we know will become Rome. And there's a very moving section of this story where he is Troy is burning, and he's about to leave the burning city, and he turns around and he sees that his wife has died. And she appears to him in a ghostly form and says, "Your fate is to keep going, and you must leave now." So he grabs his son and he grabs his father, and he puts everyone who's still alive on boats, and he carries on to his destiny. So he has many adventures, and at one point his father dies. And it's just before the middle of the Aeneid, the watershed book, and the father appears to him in a ghostly form and says, "I have something to show you. I want you to come to the underworld." Now this image had really stuck with me because I was thinking, well, where is that? What is the underworld? And why, if he had appeared to Aeneas at that moment, the connection is already there, why didn't he just finish telling him what he needed to tell him? So I've been working on this scene for quite a while. And of course the next book in the Aeneid is when Aeneas journeys to the underworld. Now what's so interesting about that book is that when he gets to the underworld, it's a moment of reconciliation. He sees people from his past, his former lover and his wife. He sees his present. The reason he's being drawn to the underworld is because his life is kind of washed out. He has no emotional reserves to carry on. So he goes to the underworld, he sees his past, he reconciles his present, and of course what Anchises wants to show him is his future. And he shows him all the people in his lineage that will be famous and important for his fate and his destiny. So the underworld, whatever that meant, was this place of reconciliation of the past, the present, and the future. And that is why he had to go to the underworld. So I'd been working on this scene for a long time. I had read it when I was a teenager, and then I read it in graduate school.
And it always called to you.
I would have it open on my desk and go back to it and look at the way Virgil wrote the Latin and look at various translators and how they had interpreted that passage. And then when I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I ended up finding a supervisor who said, I think you should look at the Aeneid from a Jungian perspective. And this was quite different because I'd never considered that maybe looking at Jung and then applying a Jungian framework to the Aeneid would tease out some of what I had been grappling with. But when I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, one of the episodes that popped out was that Jung had a dream of his father after he died. And Jung's father appears to him and says something very important, and it's the way Jung recounts this encounter with his father. He doesn't say, I wonder why I dreamed about my father. He said, I wonder why my father returned to me in dreams. And that, the way it was phrased, really spoke to me, because I felt that what Jung was trying to say was that I am encountering my deceased father in a very different way than I have dreams and that I have visions. And so it was this kind of pulling all of these themes together for me. It had me also reflecting back on what is Aeneas going through psychologically with the loss of his father. And at one point I thought, well, maybe this dissertation is going to be the role of the father in connecting ourselves and our lives to the unconscious, and whatever that means in terms of the dead. But as I kept reading and kind of pulling out some of the material out of Jung's autobiographical memoir, they like to call it, I saw that at one particular time in Jung's life, the dead kept coming in his dream time and in visions, and in different ways. They would come. There's one dream where they arrive and they're speaking to him in Latin, and he's frustrated because he can't understand them. Now what's odd is Jung knew Latin. So,
he did?
Yes, he was a classicist, really. His Latin and Greek was very good. And so, but in this dream context, they're speaking Latin to him, they're wicked gentlemen, and he doesn't know what they're saying. And he's so frustrated when he wakes up that he decides to go, he's on vacation, he decides to leave vacation and go and work on his book. And by working on his book, he felt like he was answering the question that these ancestors were asking him. So that was one dream. Another dream, he was walking in a cemetery and there were effigies, stone effigies on top of tombs, and he would stare at them and they would come alive. And so the theme throughout this particular time was the dead are alive. You think they're dead, but they're alive. And there were a few places that it was in terms of the way he was talking about it, showed me that he was putting a lot of thought into these encounters. They weren't just ghost stories. And, Jung had a past. He grew up in, Swiss countryside where on a Saturday night there wasn't Netflix to get, he was getting together and doing seances with his cousin, who was very, very psychic, and his mother was very psychic. And so this was kind of a part
fertile ground, in other words.
Absolutely, and part of his upbringing. So this was not different. And of course, at the time that he was uncovering all of this too, in Europe, and William James in Boston had a psychic he was studying, and Freud had a psychic and a medium, and a French psychiatrist was studying a medium. And at the time, people were very interested in this idea of when mediums say they're talking to the dead, what are they doing there? What is happening there? That the woman can speak and not understand or not remember.
To be the channel. To
absolutely.
Be the medium. The connection.
Exactly. So what is going on with this interesting dynamic? And they felt that these women somehow were connected to the unconscious, and that by studying them, we could understand more.
There'd be an inroad into
Exactly.
the
Now,
unconscious.
this specific time I was really interested in. And in my personal time when I became interested, at one point I was reading so much Jung that I said to my supervisor, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish the Aeneid idea of it. So I'm going to leave Aeneas on the Styx, the river Styx. We're going to say goodbye to him. And I just kept going with the Jungian material. And at the time there was a discussion that the Red Book was going to be published. Now,
So this predates the publication of
yes. So what happened during this time period was that, and we're talking about 1911, 1912, 1913, this is the time when these death dreams occurred, where really the dead were recurring and speaking to him, and he was taking specific notice of them. Around 1913, before that, he had a long personal and professional relationship with Freud. Freud was a father figure to him, and they had become very close. And they each were kind of leaders in their own psychological circles, Jung in Zurich and Freud in Vienna. And they worked on journals together. And Freud sent clients to Jung to be treated at the Wolsey Hospital. And so they had this relationship. At the time, tensions were starting to rise between them professionally because they were starting to disagree about libido. And Freud felt very attached that libido was all about sexual energy and repressed energy. And Freud and Jung said, no, there's more to it than that. There is a type of energy that we all have that draws us to become the most of ourselves that we can be. And eventually that becomes the idea of individuation and becoming, finding our type of the self. But anyway, so this argument...
The schism sort of starts.
Exactly. So this tension, and there was more going on too, political tensions with the two groups in Vienna and Switzerland. But as they started articulating their ideas and Jung started becoming more forthright, the tension kind of rose. At the same time, there's a very interesting book recently published that talks about a relationship that Jung had at the time. Freud sent Jung a client who was a young girl at the time, about 16, 17, named Sabine Spielrein. And she was at the Borgolzi Hospital, and Jung was trying to treat her for heightened anxiety. She was incredibly bright at the time, and Jung would take her on psychiatric rounds with him and would ask her opinion about other patients, even though she herself was a patient in the hospital. Eventually she got better. It was like about a year she was hospitalized, and Jung encouraged her to go to medical school because he felt that she could become an analyst and be very successful at it, which she did. He helped her get set up in Zurich in a medical school, and she proceeded to study. They became very emotionally involved around this time, and it became very awkward because she got very entranced with Jung. A couple of years later, she started saying that she wanted to have his child, and it became quite embarrassing in the circles at this time because Jung was married. And so Emma Jung, his
put the
wife,
kibosh on that.
right. She wrote to Freud and said, you have got to figure this out because this is getting to be embarrassing. So this book called Sex and Survival, about the works of Sabine Spielrein, really puts this time period in a slightly different angle. We've often thought that the schism was really professional, but the emotional taxing on Jung on this
pushed him over the edge.
Yes, a combination of things pushed him.
Now, was she psychic herself, or just in the midst of some sort of a psychotic?
I think she was psychotic, but she was very intuitive and later became an incredibly good analyst. And we have some of the papers she wrote. She worked with children, and she was Piaget's analyst.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so we have some
feel for her. Yes.
Yeah, some more details about her, thanks to this this book by John Launer, who's an analyst in London. So this tension just built and built and built, and Jung had either a breakdown, creative illness, some people call it, but he quit everything. This is like September of 1913. He broke with Freud officially, professionally, and personally, and it was a great sadness to him. Difficult, very.
And there was never any rapprochement with age?
Never.
No?
It was not to be. So around that time he has a dream, and it's quite a big dream, and the dream is of Europe being totally frozen and the seas being flowing with blood. And at the time he emerged from this dream.
And this is around what, 1913? Is this
1913?
the harbinger of World War I?
Yes, in 1913, October of 1913, he had the dream a few times. And he didn't understand it at all. From October 1913 to April of the next year, mid-April, May, he started having visions, very intense visions. And he talks in Memories, Dreams, Reflections about of trying to deal with this emotional pressure. And so what he decided to do was to sit down and let himself drop and just bring his attention inward. And he started an adventure of
An inner exploration.
Absolutely. And what he found there were characters and dialogues.
Is this where the archetypal business arises from this?
Absolutely. And what he says is that his entire psychological model that we have in almost 20 volumes of writing came from these 6 months of intense introspection. So he wrote these in incredible detail with paintings and drawings.
Paintings?
And beautiful paintings of mandalas and scenes that he had seen in his adventures inward. And he put this in the Red Book. Now, the Jung family was very hesitant about people seeing it, so they locked it in a vault for almost 50 years. Now, when I was starting to write my dissertation, I said to my supervisor, I need to see the Red Book. I know it's coming. I know the Red Book is coming, and this is what I think is in it. I think we're going to see that he had encounters with the dead. That's why we have these snippets in Memories, Dreams. And we need to look at this, because this is a very different dynamic than other visions he's having, and he's talking about them differently. So I waited. It was about 2007, 2008. I had children, and I was waiting, and my supervisor said, we could be waiting for 20 years. Are you sure you want to wait?
Stubborn, aren't you?
You're on chapter 2 here. Are you sure you want to wait? And I said, just give it a little more time. And in 2009, they published it.
Right.
Sham Dasani, who was the editor, went to the Jung family and said, we're in a different place now. People are really eager and curious to see what that material was really all about. And some people said, this is too dangerous. We've been working theoretically with Jungian.
Well, it would upset the apple cart at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
What we've understood Jungian theory to be.
Yeah.
Why do we want to shake that up? So once it came out, I said, great, I'll do this in 6 months. I'll read it through. I'll pull the scenes of the dead out, and I'll finish. I'll finish. Just give me 6 months. And it took me 3.5 years to just get through just the scenes of the dead that he was dealing with. So that kind of gives you an idea.
That's how we got you to this.
Yes,
this point.
yes. And really the way he talked about not only his father's dream, that his father returned to him and he was speaking to his father. And his father came back in several other dreams as well.
Never his mother, but I suppose that's more Freudian.
Yeah,
It's usually mother excuse me. Yeah.
Perhaps. And what's interesting, it's his mother who was psychic, not his father. His father was a pastor, and so had the religious ideals. Yeah. And his mother was the psychic one, and he spoke. He referred to his mother as having these two personalities, which he himself had. He felt at times that his number one personality was the personality that was out in the world,
and then a whole inner life.
And an
that-
inner life, and this other personality, he said, was from an older man from a long time ago, but he's always with me and he's always wise. And so I was really interested in taking these ideas that he had been seasoning his work with. This is really his personal material, not his professional material. And I was interested in seeing, if we look at the Red Book, is there indication that in fact he was connecting with the dead in a very different place of the unconscious, or in a very different way than he did in terms of the dynamic of what we'd call figures of the unconscious. And figures are figures that we might see in dreams that really belong to our psyche. Okay, and
part and
there's
parcel of us.
exactly, you know,
Yeah.
our inner lives.
Did he go to various mediums himself? I mean,
Yes, he, in fact, Nandor Fodor talks about him going to seance circles for many, many years. Now, his dissertation, his medical dissertation for finishing medical school, was about his psychic cousin, Helene Prestwick, and her seances and the kind of information that came through her. And he wrote a whole analytical treatise about what he observed in her. And his conclusion was that mediums are kind of strange.
wow, wow, yes, okay.
Right? That mediums display odd behavior. Now, what's so interesting is at that time, he too was experiencing this odd recognition in himself.
Something was percolating and
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
interesting because Eileen Garrett, I know, visited him a couple of times in Ascona, and she was frustrated, and from time to time she would want to give up her mediumship. Or what's that all about? And he very forcefully convinced her not to give up her mediumship. So I think that's interesting.
I do too, because I think that he valued people's relationship to the unconscious. He felt very strongly that one of our duties, our personal duties, was to live with our dead, to get one with our dead. And that didn't necessarily mean inheriting the family business. It didn't necessarily mean that. But it could mean listening to the dead and their influence in your life and the decisions you make. And the third part of the Red Book is dedicated to kind of that dynamic.
Yeah.
So yes, he was. That doesn't surprise me that he was encouraging her, because probably, I'm going to go out on a limb here, probably what he saw in her was someone who was dedicated to her process, who knew it very well. Couldn't necessarily explain it.
No,
but there was
or
someone
the origin, but there was some. She was working with that modality.
she worked with, and she honored it. You know, she never turned her back on it. And having questions is fine about it, and questioning, you know, the veracity of it. And you'll question the veracity of it until you mentioned it. He went through all of those visions, and then August 1st, the World War I broke out, and then he realized what his dream was about.
That was presaging
And it was
that.
really healing for him. It was a horrible time, obviously, but it was really healing for him to understand that he had what was called a big dream, a dream that's not necessarily personally meant for one person.
Well, what does Jung mean when he talks about active imagination? I mean, how do you imagination versus whatever's bubbled up?
Right. And this is kind of an interesting concept that he developed over a period of time, because he wasn't sure what he was doing when he let himself drop and he became introspective. But the way I like to explain it when I teach is, as you're sitting here with me and we're having a conversation, if I asked you, while you have your eyes open, to envisage what you had for lunch, how it sat on the table, and what it looked like, and maybe how it smelled, and maybe the noises around the room at the time, you're still looking at me, okay? So you're engaged in a consciousness on the conscious level, and those images are somewhat
in the soup.
Yes,
underneath.
right,
Right.
are on a conscious level that's slightly below. And so what he realized is that if he just withdrew his focus from consciousness, he was finding all sorts of adventures. And the deeper he got, he felt the deeper into the unconscious he got. So he found a personal unconscious that we all have, where our dreams come from, that could be themes.
Is it striated? Is it layers?
It's
Theoretically, I mean.
Theoretically, it seems to be. The Red Book seems to allude to that. And the way he talks about certain dreams he's had about the dead. He had a wonderful dream about Tony Wolfe, who worked with him for many, many years, and who was kind of his paramour, lover, we don't know, but helped him a great deal during this particular time when he didn't understand what was happening. And he would emerge and say to her, we think, this is what I see. And I don't, what does this mean? Why is this happening now? And what does this mean? And so active imagination for him became not only something that he discovered how to do, but then he used it to discover more about the unconscious and about how consciousness fits with the unconscious.
Well, how did he, what's the difference between visions and dreams? Is it just nomenclature, or do you equate them as being one and the same, or?
Well, he didn't, but the machinery of both of them is similar. The dynamic is similar. He said one of the purest forms of access to the unconscious was through dreaming, because the ego isn't involved. So the material just arises in dream form, and it's unadulterated by our ego wanting, what's that? What's this? Whereas visions also would happen spontaneously, but we have this aspect of the ego engaged, and
With the vision.
with a vision,
Yeah.
right? And he would have these occasions where there was one occasion he was on a train and suddenly he had this vision of someone drowning, and he had remembered, and it seemed to be an incident from a few years ago of someone drowning. And then when he got home, his grandchildren approached him all in furor and said, the littlest grandson almost drowned. And he thought, well, that's interesting, because while I was on the train, this incident was happening simultaneously. But in some manner, I managed to get it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Somehow I got a memory of someone drowning. So some kind of proxy seemed to be initiated in terms of a synchronicity.
So he didn't think of the psychic force per se, that this was an ability per se. This is just a recognition of these various unconscious things that you take note of or give you clues.
Right. Well, I think.
I mean, was he frightened? Did he think he was psychic himself, or he could care less? I mean, it was just an interesting.
I think he was scared. I think he was very
most
scared.
people are, yeah.
Yes, and rattled by it. And then I think as a psychiatrist, and he always felt that he had a scientific method, and he always felt that his Jungian approach was a science, and he wanted to be considered a scientist. He approached it in a very methodical way, and so he.
Well, it's safer that way too, isn't it? You
Yes.
don't lose your way.
And I mean, did he think he was psychic? I think he would have preferred to not answer the question like that. I think he would have preferred to say, well, what I think's going on in my psychological model is that when we pull our attention from consciousness, we go to unconscious places. And the way we can moderate the in-between is through this active imagination, or this sense of awareness of the different levels. And really, Jungian psychology, if you had to kind of put it in a box with a bow, is the idea of making the unconscious more conscious, because that process allows you to become more yourself, right? And more centered in your sense of self. Now, if that's part of your journey, it would seem the more unconscious you bring into consciousness, the more you're going to see, right?
Exactly.
Of all kinds of things, right?
Yeah, but the more you could get really lost in all of that
Yes.
soup.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he did. He got lost. And Tony Wolfe really seemed to
Help
assist
to
him.
throw him a lifeline to sort of.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is people talk about her never being really good at active imagination, but she was very good about watching people's process. There are some people that had her as a analyst and said she was the best analyst and better than Jung.
Interesting.
So I think she had a facility for being able to see what he saw in the way he described it.
So she could resonate to what he was talking about, but she had her own. She could cut to the chase, sort of deal.
Yeah, and I don't think she was belabored by getting muddled in his material. There was somehow that distance for her that allowed her.
That she could motivate and actually produce other than that?
and get him articulating what it could mean.
Well, so then, I can see that there is the importance of the Red Book for both Jungians and the broader psychological community, but could you speak to that a bit? I mean, that's a pretty big
It is.
enchilada to
It is, and I think it's important because of timing also, that it had been kind of secreted away for so long, and that there was kind of
that
shame.
cachet is very,
Absolutely some embarrassment and some shame in what was all of that. Okay, and I think just the moment of letting it emerge and seeing how it falls within, psychological communities as well. And it's also speaks to why Jungian studies is not necessarily embraced by the academy. You'll find programs in universities in England.
are they very standoffish? I mean, they don't want to entertain
Americans are, Freud.
In generalities.
Yes, I mean Freud is much more accepted in terms of in college campuses than.
Well, maybe it's because the sexual drive is a big deal when you're a freshman in college.
Yes, exactly. Maybe that's it. But it's been very difficult to legitimize Jungian studies, and I'm not saying across the board. There's some wonderful institutions that do a wonderful job of planting the flag and saying this is what we do in terms of training depth psychologists or analytical psychologists. And then there are many Jung training platforms around the world. But in terms of an academic presence, Jung, we need to work to get Jung back into the academy and more mainstream.
More of a searchlight.
Okay, so the Red Book is been enlightening and has been uncomfortable. It's been challenging for Jungians and non-Jungians alike. I think none of us knew the extent to which Jung's an artist. I think that surprised everyone. There's some very sophisticated discussions about really what he was doing. No one knew. I mean, at least in my generation, we didn't realize what an amazing artist he was and how dedicated he was to that part of the process. And in transpersonal circles, he's considered really father of the expressive arts therapy, Santre, dance therapy, movement therapy, art therapy, and you can see from the Red Book the start, the guff of that, the starting.
Well, off camera, we've had a discussion about the similarities of psychic functioning and creativity and the arts and this and that. Did Jung ever write specifically about creativity, the overarching thing, or
he
just touched on it? I mean,
he's done it in pockets. He talked about Picasso. He wrote an essay about Picasso. I mean, in a very generally sweeping way, I would say that his interest in creativity is the closer someone is to their unconscious. And so, yes, you are close to the unconscious, but what do you want to do with that? So people who are burdened with creativity, it's so necessary. He encouraged people, if you can't do anything, then sit and draw. Let's draw. If you can't talk about it, let's draw. Let's work in sand. Let's move. There's a wonderful...
So it's another way into the unconscious
absolutely.
To unlock the puzzle of
absolutely.
Who you are.
And also not only who you are, but what's troubling you. I mean, that's who came to him, people who were really troubled, people who were in despair, and part of his job as an analyst was to find ways of relieving suffering, because this whole journey through the Red Book, he ended up feeling better as he kept journeying.
So it was cathartic for him?
It was totally cathartic for him, because he emerged out of the process feeling better.
Did he actually lock it up, or it was the family?
It was the family.
It was the family.
Yeah.
He just didn't want
He passed around parts of it to his circles. The third part, which he calls Scrutinies, was called Seven Sermons to the Dead. He passed handwritten versions to small circles, and people were like, "What do you?" This is a very bizarre,
kind of out of context during the just appearing.
Yes, it was a very odd
to
text and hard to grapple with in terms of his other public writings and very academic writings that he did about psychology. So yes, I think also, he has a lovely little story about a young girl who came to him with anxiety and couldn't sleep. And there's this just lovely, this is in Memory Streams Reflections, and they just sing together. They sing a
Really?
folk song, and she went off and never had to come see him again. And it was just this connection of something that Jung saw that she needed to awaken in her.
And sort of bolstered her, put her on track. So her,
Absolutely, just put her on track, and off she went and never came back. Assuming that we assumed that she was fine. So, I love the some tales you hear say that Jung was the only person they knew who could interpret a dream, having never heard it.
well, was that a reflection of his
Absolutely.
definitely.
His
psychic-
intuition, his psychic
his own.
sense, his awareness of having someone in the therapy hour and being able to read them in whatever way, in whatever that means.
Well, that awareness. I mean, I find it telling that Garrett herself wrote a book entitled Awareness, and just having that awareness.
Awareness,
Yeah,
right,
basically.
right.
It really fits well. But let's see, since we are Parapsychology Foundation, why do you think people interested in parapsychology or psychical research, why would they be particularly beneficial to read your book?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I think is because the parapsychological community has had a long relationship with trying to find methods of proving postmortem existence, discarnate existence. And this is historical. It's been a very, very long project. And so I think the Red Book and then what I've tried to pull out of both the Red Book and Memory Streams about Jung's personal encounters, I think builds a compelling case that the dead are a different kind of experience and that Jung experienced them differently to dream material and vision material that was really a part of his personality. And I think that's a very exciting moment to kind of play with this idea that if we recognize that the dead could possibly be, as Jung had said in the Red Book, souls without bodies. There's a wonderful scene where he's asleep in a kitchen. Okay, he falls asleep and he hears this buzzing.
This is a dream of his?
That
Or an experience?
it's an
that he
act of
has?
imagination
Ah,
that in the
okay.
Red Book. So he's in a kitchen and he falls asleep and he hears this whooshing sound and he sees a throng of dead coming through the kitchen. And he says, "Where are you going?" And they say, "We are going to Jerusalem to pray at the Holy Sepulchre." And of course, the Holy Sepulchre is supposedly the place where Jesus rose after the crucifixion. So we're talking about the dead going to pray at the spot of where
the
the afterlife.
Yeah, the
could
graduation.
the graduation, I love it. So he says to the main spokesperson, whose name is Ezekiel, "Really, you're going? Can I go with you?" Like, that looks fun. "Can I go with you?" And he turns around. Ezekiel says, "You cannot go with us. You have a body, but we are dead."
Interesting.
And so this moment really spoke to me as to this is how Jung perceived the dead in these unconscious spaces. That although Ezekiel defined the dead for him, I think Jung was able to perceive those essences that did not have bodies, okay, those soul entities that were the dead, and in contrast to those entities that were really projections of his personality waiting to be dealt with and pulled back.
Well, then, did he accept the survival hypothesis? I mean, without your body, but your soul goes on. I mean, did he?
Yes,
Definitely.
he did. And
Because of all his life experiences, or was it because his father was a pastor and it's part of within the religious dogma?
well, after the dream of his father, okay, which was in 1895, 96, he ended up presenting a paper to his university crowd, and basically it was about the immortality of the soul. He said, how can we as scientists and people engaged in intellectual dialogue not consider this possibility?
A possibility.
A
And he wasn't
possibility.
emphatic that
He
this
said
is how it worked.
The possibility, and this was after the dream of his father. This encounter must have been incredibly moving for him, that he wasn't just having a dream. He was experiencing a bereavement moment, a reappearance, an after-death sighting within a dream context. And so it's got him thinking about it, and he wanted to debate it, and he just got no traction at all.
Wasn't well received.
It
at
was
all?
not well received at all in this particular group. And so he had enough of those moments of people pushing back or people laughing and dismissing, that he, I think, felt compelled to find a psychological explanation.
A framework that he could hook this all into.
And that perhaps within it, there would be space for the dead. Okay?
Interesting.
And so I like to think that what he inherited for his work to be one with the dead was to answer their question, what are you going to do about us? What are you going to do about the dead in your psychological model? And I think he felt like they kept knocking on his door for that explanation, you know, and that he felt throughout his life compelled to at least keep that possibility open. Now he says after his heart attack in 1944, he says, I have absolutely no doubt now that the soul exists after death.
Now, why was that? Like, did he have a near-death experience?
Yes, he did.
or-
He did.
Oh,
He had a near-death experience. He had successive visions after it. Some of the visions lasting many hours, and he talks about it lasting over a few weeks. He also talks about seeing his doctor in primordial form, and he looked at his doctor in this visionary space. This wasn't a dream. These were visions, and he knew his doctor was going to die. And then, in fact, his doctor died within the next couple of weeks.
So in that limbic sort of area that he was existing in, that's when all this...
When he realized, now it's kind of interesting that realization wouldn't have come so cogently after the Red Book material.
Yeah,
that it would have happened
follow.
so.
It would follow.
You would think, but I think there were professional pressures on him. He was still trying to make a name for himself. These were
Timing is everything.
time, absolutely. And so towards the end of his life, when he had the heart attack, then he said, absolutely, I know that the soul exists after it detaches from the body. I just don't know how long that takes, and I don't know how long the personality is intact in that
So
process.
did he think that we all go back to a great, the collective unconscious? I mean, did he...
Yeah, he wasn't as specific about that. You know, he talks about that experience of visioning that being one of the most ecstatic experiences he's ever had. That he said dying is the most wonderful experience you could possibly ever have, and he regretted having to come back.
Well, that's a current theme with people experiencing near death or whatever, that they say if they're in the light in the tunnel and
Right.
whatever, and no, it's not your time,
Yes.
and I gotta go back. No, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go
And
back.
that's exactly
and
what
it's
happened.
painful to go back.
And that's exactly what happened to him.
And yet they all seem very convinced after coming back that there's definitely something on it, and the fear drops.
Exactly, and the fear drops. Now, I think he probably had an assured position on this much earlier, but he wasn't so forthright and
Didn't
being-
want to come out because
He
of the
he
political
didn't-
pressures.
Right,
and-
he didn't seem to be coming out about it. I mean, when people wrote to him, he has letters where people said, I woke up and I saw my dead brother standing there, and he was always very sympathetic, There was a wonderful story about him and one of his analysts that worked with him, Marie-Louise von Franz. And another analyst came to her and said, I have this client who is a young woman who was engaged to a pilot, and he died in the war. And she has these dreams, and I think these dreams are just her bereaved
wish
psyche.
fulfillment, or her just
Absolutely. Marie-Louise von Franz looks at the series of dreams, and she said, yes, in fact, some of these are that, but these over here, that's the pilot coming back. And she said, no way. And she said,
So
"Take
it's
them."
not all or nothing. I mean, you don't have to.
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Marie-Louise von Franz
I
could
think
look at
that
the
makes sense.
material. She was distinguishing. There was something about the material and the way the fiancé was expressing the details of the dream that made her think that this was projection and grief, but this was the pilot that was appearing in the same way Jung's father did, right? So she said, okay, if you don't believe me, take them to Jung. So this analyst took the dreams and looked at them, and Jung chose the same ones.
He did.
These are projections,
Really?
and these are
These
the ones.
are, the connection.
So, and Marie-Louise von Franz says in really interesting terms, you know, the dead live in such different conditions, even though they themselves are unconscious material. They are different to figures of the unconscious. Now, how you define that?
yeah, say that one again.
So-
say that again.
So
That's
she's-
important, I think.
Yeah, so she said, you know, the dead live in such different conditions to us
Right,
that even though they themselves are unconscious material,
right.
living in the unconscious, they are still very different from us. And still very different from figures of the unconscious, projected material that we would find in dreams that are really our material, right?
Very
So
interesting.
this was something that this group of analysts, Jung's first generation of analysts, I think they felt they knew this. Not something that they wanted to advertise a lot.
Sort of accepted it, but they weren't going to propagate it. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Part of the reason, because they were trying to get a firm scientific psychological model out there.
well, it sounds like parapsychology, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right,
we'll
right.
walk from the messier stuff.
Yes.
Trying to get
Exactly.
a firm grounding.
Right, exactly. Definitely.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so I think that people in the parapsychological community might feel relief to see that there is material there that looks quite different, even in the psychological setting. You know, the paranormal discussion has been inside-outside kind of thing. Am I making up the ghost, or is the ghost standing there, right? We might want to reframe that. We might want to be talking about a psychological perspective that includes both. Okay, that somehow in our psyche that we do want to reconcile them, why they came,
Right.
and the timing of why they've come. But do we necessarily need to know that they're out there or in here? Because isn't that our experience of our lives anyway? We have internal experiences, and then we have external experiences.
That's true.
And maybe we need to reframe this question. And I would like to see the parapsychological community do the reframing. I think it
Well,
would.
I think we need some guidance. So are you gonna continue to help us reframe?
Well,
Your
I don't
book
think
is a good start, right? Yes, for sure.
Well, I'm hoping that your community will really like to continue the discussion and say this particular point might not be as important as it was, say, 75 years ago, when we were, looking at ectoplasm, when we were looking at how mediums work. Seances and the format of seances. There might be more to a psychological framework and how we experience these things ourselves.
So the work is not done, is what you're saying.
No, I don't
Yeah, no,
think.
not at
I don't
all.
think. And I think the Red Book is wonderful in that it adds more and more questions. And not everyone's going to want to pick up those questions. There was this long moment of silence in the Jungian community after 2009.
Really? Did everybody just?
People were like,
I don't want to touch that.
one of the analysts, it was so great. He said, "It's like a train wreck. You can't stop looking, and then you have to stop looking, And it's compelling material. The Red Book is compelling material, and you read and you have to walk away and think about it because it's very intense.
Well, it hurts your head, right? I mean, and any psychic functioning too. I mean, you get immersed in it, and then it comes the boggle factor, and you just take a breather.
Yes, you do. You have to walk away from it. And so I think there was just this moment when everyone said, well, what are we going to do with this? What should we do with this thing? This is the font, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what he experienced, after which he emerged and wrote a psychology that was
Do you think it's changed how we teach, how you teach Jungian psychology now? I mean, has it been an appreciable response or pushback, or is it more attractive now? Does it harm or does it help the
I think it
academic
depends.
pursuit?
I think it depends who's reading it and who wants to talk about it, really. I don't know if you could say, I've heard some academics say this is not a good idea. We do not need to be reading this. We need to be reading Jung's own professional writings on what he thought were important
the more structured.
premises.
Yeah,
Then we
his
have a whole-
conclusions rather than how he got to
Exact-
from A to B.
Exactly. And then there are people who can't ignore, to have a visionary psychological model and refuse to look at the visionary content seems a little cheating, right? So maybe we do need to look at the original source of where this came from, how it came, how he managed. And maybe that helps us learn not only about our own visionary faculty, and especially coupled with what we're understanding about neuroscience now and what we're understanding about the brain and memory, okay? And maybe we can learn more about what the dead tell us about our own unconscious and what they tell us about our relationship to our unconscious. So it depends who you're reading and
Okay.
who wants to come to the
But
table.
I certainly see a commonality with an interest in psychic research.
Absolutely.
And definitely, and I think I would tell everybody. But the book is by Routledge, right?
Routledge, yeah.
And you can get it in Amazon
Yes,
and whatever.
anywhere online. Yeah,
for
it's
sure,
out there.
for sure.
It's
So
out
I
there.
think, can they send me any questions to you that I can
Please.
forward
I would love that.
or whatever?
I would love that.
Definitely, because we like to stir the pot.
Let's
here at
stir the
Parasite
pot.
Foundation,
I love
for
that.
sure.
Let's
for
stir the
sure.
pot.
And keep us posted on book number 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Will do.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Lizette. It's a pleasure.
Hi there, I'm Lisette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation. So welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.